Let's see. We're live again. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from, watching this replay. My name is Raquel Daniel. I'm pleased to be here again. This is episode 3 of Safeguarding Our Children. It's an extended conversation that we've been having and recording for school owners, for teachers, for parents, for everyone who has access to children, nonprofit organizations. As long as you have access to children, caregivers, this conversation is for you. And I'd like to quickly first say thank you to Beyond the Classroom Foundation for hosting us, and the Mastercard Foundation for sponsoring the Safety Savvy Project, which is hosting this conversation today. As usual, I have a guest. So permit me to quickly bring up my guest today. Is like I was saying earlier, that I first thought that he was a stranger, but not knowing that it's actually a friend. So thank you so much, Chukwuemeka, for coming today and being on the show to talk about safety, internet safety for children. I'd like to give a quick rundown. First and foremost, we've recorded home safety for children. We've recorded school safety for children. And we realized that some of these conversations are just coming in and out of each other. And because, of course, children come from homes and then they get to school. And then when they get homework from school or as they grow, they get access to technology, so they go online to do their homework, or their parents get busy and hand them over gadgets and say, take these gadgets, play while I do my work. So we realize that it's like a thread going through. So that's why we're coming from these topics one by one. And so today we're going to talk about internet safety for children. I have a series of questions that I'll be pushing through to Mr. Monyie, but then before I do that, I'd like him to please quickly, for the benefit of those who don't know who you are, introduce yourself to us, and so that we can sort of know you.
Morning, my name is Chukwuemeka Monyie. I'm an executive director at Like a Palm Tree Foundation. Like a Palm Tree Foundation is a child-focused nonprofit based in Nigeria. We do work across various spectrums of the space relating to children, but particularly on child online safety. And our expression for child online safety is wise and harmless. So wise and harmless is our expression. So in case you may not see Like a Palm Tree harmless, that's our child online safety expression. We've been doing this for a while. We've done research, we've done publications, we've done consultancy on child online protection for the government, for schools, for individuals, and we've also done some bits of publishing in that area. We've written and published 2 books, a school textbook, worked with the Nigeria Communications Commission and several other organizations in Nigeria and outside Nigeria on child online safety. And I'm a lawyer primarily, so child online safety is like my first love, right? So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's good that you're a lawyer. Like I said, I saw, I think it's Chronicles Solicitors. I think I saw that online. I'm like, yeah. Lawyer. So anybody that wants to harass or bully our children like this, will just call you on the phone. Handle these people. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So our first question is around using devices. So I have a 3-year-old, and she started using the device when she was like a year old. So guilty. But of course, it wasn't internet enabled, But then still, I still felt guilty, like tabs and all those things, gadgets. So as an expert, so tell us, with this technological advancement that we have, at what age should parents, ignore also us that have defaulted? We will get better in the future. But what age should parents really hand their children gadgets, internet enabled or not? So maybe start with internet enabled and then devices that are non-enabled.
Like, to be honest with you, to say, okay, this is the age at which you should give a child a device. Maybe not just a phone, maybe a tablet or any sort of digital device. I would say there's no particular age. And the reason is that children have different contexts, different backgrounds, different social and psychological needs. And also parents also have needs, to be honest with you, because as much as parents have to and want to be there 24/7 for their children, they also have their own needs. And sometimes a mobile phone is a distraction for the child, so that the parents can have some me time, right? So there are a lot of factors that play into this. But what parents are usually advised to take into consideration before deciding on at what age to give a child a device depends on the safety risk, depends on the kind of device that you are giving the child. So when I say safety risk, so the online safety risk, right? So that's why it makes sense to say, which is a good thing. It makes sense to say maybe a child should not have an internet-enabled device that they are able to play around with too early, right? It should be as much as possible, even if it's an internet-enabled device, it should be one that the child is able to use with a lot of supervision and monitoring. And the child is not using the device. What the child is doing, the child is just watching content on the device, because they are two different things, right? Being able to watch content on a device and use the device are essentially two different things. So there are all these factors that play into this. So no parent should before, and I think child online safety has evolved. Before, there used to be a lot of conversations around age, what age the child should be given a phone, at what age should you allow your child start watching TV. In fact, in the United States, there was a time when it was said that children under the age of 2 should not even be allowed to watch TV, right? Should not even be allowed to watch television, because it could have some form of psychological effect on them later on and things like that. But society has evolved, right? Society has evolved. So there are a lot of factors that parents should take into consideration. But one thing that is very, very certain is that for younger children, for toddlers and children who are still growing, they should only have access to content. They shouldn't necessarily own devices. Even if they own devices, they should not be allowed to play around with those devices, right? But as children begin to grow older, right, then you can give them devices. So there's the need for communication, right? That's the primary reason we used to have mobile phones. Parents want to be able to communicate with their children. A child doesn't need a smartphone to be communicated with, right? You can use a feature phone, a phone that doesn't have internet connectivity. And then as the child begins to grow older and learn and take responsibility, then you can allow the child have a phone that can connect to the internet. Because the issue with connecting to the internet is the fact that it means that the child would have access to social apps, right? It means that your child will be able to go online and probably create a page on Instagram. And nowadays we are seeing children who are 8, who are 9, who have pages on Instagram and claim that they are 13, because you need to be 13 to join many of these platforms. So when you take all this into consideration, you take the peculiarity of your child. So you can have a child who is 10 years, who is pretty obedient, who is pretty mature, and who will fall in line, right? It's not a child that would go about and set up an Instagram page or have a Facebook page. We've seen some children have one Facebook page for their parents back then and another page for their friends, right? This child will fall in line, and you trust this child pretty much. The child may actually just have need for an internet-enabled device for academic work, right? You don't want a situation where the child is only coming to you because they want to go on Google, they want to use Google to check for information and do their assignment, or they need a tab. And every time they have to use your own tablet. So if you think that the child is young and pretty obedient, then you may allow such a child to have an internet-enabled device to have your own peace of mind, right? But you can keep monitoring the child. However, if it's a child that there are children, and the child is prone to want to go their own way, then you may want to be stricter with that child. So there are all these factors that play into this, and there's no particular age, right, at which a child will be said to be given a mobile device. Yeah.
What about the health implications? So I realized that, like I said, some of us have defaulted, so sometimes, when I want to drive, my daughter was quite young, then I'll just put the tab, on behind me, because she's in the car seat, and strapped up, but then I'll just hang the tab on the back of my seat, and then she can just be watching it. But then I kept asking myself, what about her eyes? What about her health? She's just a year plus, even though it was a distraction, so I can focus and drive, and it would help me not be distracted, right? But then I kept thinking about it, and a few times I checked online to see, the effects of, all these lights on children and their health. Will they affect her eyes? Before she started wearing glasses way early than she should? Should I take her to the hospital? So I kept thinking, what about the health implications? Is there any to more the eyes, anything? Is there anything?
There are health implications to mobile phone use. The rays that come out from the phone, the positioning of the child, considering how a child or a person can sit down when using devices, how the child can strain their body. There's also the issue of ADHD, where the child begins to issue of concentration, right? If it's not a digital device, they struggle with concentration, and they don't want to, they find it hard to read books, physical books, and they want to just. But the truth is, at the end of the day, the thing with all this is moderation. Moderation is the key, right? Moderation is the key. So if you are able to properly moderate how much access, so and also as children begin to grow older, there's science and there's research that shows that for the more time the child spends before screens, right, the more likely that the child will be obese, right? Because the more, when the child spends a lot of time before screens, and then the child wants to eat junk, right? They just keep going on junk, right? So there are many of these things that play into this, and which one has to take into consideration. But the truth is, moderation is the key. So one thing that we must always also understand about the human body is that man is created to evolve and adapt, right? So even our body typically adapts to our surroundings, right? To our environment. And whether you are placed in a region that is cold, that is very cold, your body would naturally adapt. Now, the truth is, over time, the human body will adapt to fit the fact that we're spending a lot of time on screens. The body will typically adapt. However, you do not want your child to be the experiment, right? That scientists will use later on to say, okay, let's adjust this way, let's adjust that way. So for a parent at this time, you want to, depending when you find the balance, you want to be very moderate. What do we mean by being moderate? It means that don't transition your children too fast to a digital world, right? When we live primarily in a physical world, so that, because you're not raising robots, right? You are raising people that you want to know, that you want them to learn, to grow up to know that physical relationships are more important than virtual relationships, right? You're raising people who should know that physical relationships are more important than virtual relationships, because social media has evolved. I was talking to Raquel earlier where we started, and I had known her from her Facebook days, right? And she probably never knew about me from Facebook, right? Because she was the popular one. She is the popular one, right? So you know more about those people, right? But I can't remember. I don't know when last I went on Facebook, right? Facebook allowed for some form of physical interaction, some form of social closeness among its users compared to many other platforms. You could develop kind of like some close relationships with people. Or I built more friendships on Facebook than I've built on any other social media platform in recent time, right? Because social media has evolved in its own way. But you want to raise children who know that physical relationships are very, very important, because nowadays relationships are not the core of social networks, right? And Pepe Dem is the core of social networks. It's yes. How much you can show yourself off and things like that. So you want to raise people who understand that. So you don't want to allow your children live their lives solely online. You want to allow them to know that they can play, they can go to the playground and play, they can go to swim, they can go to take music classes, they can do a lot of physical activity. So the goal is moderation, right? But if it were to tilt in any direction, I would say that physical activities should always outweigh the digital activities, because we are still learning a lot in terms of the effect of the digital world on our health, right? So let's not be the ones that will be used as the experiments. Yes.
Yes, so internet relationships are good. It's good to start off there, and then of course, so you can take it offline, as much as possible.
Yes.
So thank you for. I've been thinking about how I'm going to do my future kids and technology. So I'll find something else to do. Thankfully, as I already have coloring books and tracing books that I produced, so
very just important.
Learn at home. So yeah. So I hope that parents are learning, and everyone that's watching has listened and is going to adhere to this simple but very instructive instruction. So how do we, I know you mentioned that you have this internet awareness program, cybersecurity aware. I'm not sure how to mention it, but something around internet safety for children, right? So how effective has it been? Does it extend to schools so that they teach the children also how to use the devices when they're doing their homeworks? Also what links not to click on, so how comprehensive is this awareness program you're having, and what's the penetration? How's the penetration being in schools?
We find that a lot of schools have increasingly, right, because of course there's a lot of social that social consciousness around online safety. Unfortunately, though, it's one thing to educate a child. It's another thing to educate the child properly. How do I explain that? So there's this thing about clinical education where we all go to school, but there's a reason why some schools have better output. Why 10 children can write WAEC, right? And some children will do better than others because of the way the education was delivered, right, to the children. So for children, online safety consists of education and experiences, because when you teach a child about science, when you teach a child about biology, when you teach a child about civic education and many of these things, for many of those things, there are things that the child is not experiencing yet, right? A child has, for a long time, a child will have no business with Amweba, right? So when you're teaching a child about Amweba, those things in science, Greek, when you teach a child about Greek and the kinds of foods and all that, the child's business is to eat. He doesn't really know about which ones are legumes or what kind of. So for children, many of those things are abstract, but for child online safety, it's very experiential for them, right? So the issue is not so much the education, right, as much as the sort of experiences, because you are teaching a person about something that they are increasingly immersed in, right? Compared to our generation where we grew up in a Nigeria that started getting used to feature phone. Which feature phones, just the normal phones, the Nokia 3310, and then evolving to the more digital phones, and compared to the phones we have today. But the children of today are born into a world where smartphones and devices are all around them. That's the reality they know. That's the reality that you're talking about. Your 3-year-old child. That's the reality the child knows, because when the parent wants to have me time, the parent puts the screen. Okay, you can have this one for yourself. Let me have some time to myself, and it works. It works. Right? It works. So because it works, some parents are fine with that, right? So that's the world that children live in. Now, because of that, education is not enough. Education is not enough. And because our education systems are not very, very experiential. They are just you're just delivering head knowledge, right? But the child is experiencing many of the issues that he or she is facing. So I would say that on the education part, we are making good progress. Increasingly, schools are adopting programs around online safety, and schools are also evolving their own curricula around online safety, their own internal school policies around what happens when a child is in school. We've seen issues, I'll be honest with you. When we started this work in 2016, what actually happened was we started with a survey. We did a survey of over 3,000 children across states in Nigeria. And when we went to schools, the experiences we had, some of those experiences, I can't even share them because they were terrible, they were sad. There's a particular school that had introduced children to tablets, a very big school in Lagos. And children were given tablets because, at the time it was becoming the in thing that tablets, or you had educational tablets. Everyone wanted to make sure that their children had educational tablets. It was becoming the in thing. But there was no good policy around that. These children were using these tablets to watch films and they had pornographic material on their school devices because these tablets were not properly positioned for children, and so it became just another tablet device for the children. So all these things happen at the time, but increasingly schools are becoming more aware. But we still think that on the experiential end, right, that there's some bit of feeling, right? And when we mean the experiential end, it means that we need to begin to have. So we're talking to children a lot, but we need to begin to have children talk to us. So, and that's where the Western world thrives. Their activities and their education on child online safety and things like that are heavily data driven. Right. So every year you are reviewing the number of children that have exposure to online grooming. You are reviewing the failures in the system. You are reviewing the national policy. I'll give you a practical example. Everybody was aware of what happened with the particular school where the children who had in Dubai, right, and the school in Lagos that suspended the children over child pornography. I don't know if you remember the incident that was trending where a video a child pornographic video was being circulated on social media, and Nigerians did not even know that video was child pornography. Like you shouldn't share such kind of content, right? So there's low awareness among the populace. Even if you're educating the children, their parents don't know enough, the adults don't know enough. So we're just educating them in a vacuum. Schools too need to be data driven. So what we typically encourage schools to do is that, and well, we've seen a few schools do that. It's costly, it's time consuming, to be honest, compared to just educating. But for example, in this particular year, do a survey. How many of your children have had negative experiences online? How many of your children have had someone proposition them online? How many of your children have had someone ask them to send a nude picture of themselves online? How many of your children have been victims of phishing? When you do that survey next year, right, you're able to compare to say, last year, this were a number of children that had these experiences. This is where we stand. Okay, you are able to say, how do we tweak our curriculum? What are the areas that we should focus on? Do you understand? So the more we do, the more we engage data, the more schools engage data, the more progress. We find that the more schools engage, the countries that engage data more in their child online safety approach are the countries that seem to do better in that regard. Yeah.
Wow. As I was talking about phishing and, what's it called? Cyberbullying and all that, it just took me down to a question that's supposed to be beneath it, but I have to bring it back up. I have to bring it back up about, sexual exploitation online, and cyberbullying, and then phishing and all sorts of harassment, everything for children. So my question here is becoming a thing, like you just mentioned now. So what should we do, to how should we start teaching our children from home, to begin to report these incidents? So it's difficult to talk to children sometimes, they have their way, but how do you practically bring it to them so that they understand the importance of, reporting if they're online and someone is trying to bully them online to give out personal information? How can we teach them in simple ways to report to us parents, or if it's a school, they are maybe in a boarding school and they're using a school facility, how can they report it immediately? So do you have any tactics, if I may say, that we can use to get them?
The thing with it is that the simple rule around this issue is that if a child trusts, right, they will talk. If a child trusts, they will talk. And the summary of that is that if a child trusts a friend, a peer, a colleague, a classmate, a teacher, a parent, they will talk. And it's not just peculiar with children. It's also something that's peculiar with adults. If you trust somebody, you will talk to the person. You would want to talk to the person about certain things. So if I trust you on technology, for example, right, I would want to, when I have issues relating to technology, I want to come and talk to you about that because I trust your wisdom and your intellect in that regard. If a child trusts an adult around the issue of empathy, they will talk. Now, what do I mean by that? What we find many times is that we are typically very mechanical in our dealing with children. I'll give you an example. You have a school, you have a counselor, right, whose responsibility is to talk to children, right, around the issue of online safety, around any issue relating to the children, psychological, emotional issues, and all that. But you do not have a measuring system in place to find out how effective, or an appraisal system is to find out how effective that counselor is. When children are being bullied in school, if the children are being abused, if they are being bullied, the likelihood is that they will not speak up. That's the truth. The likelihood is that those children will not speak up. So it's the same thing that happens in the house, right? Parents are always asking the question of, oh, my children do not talk. When this issue happens, they do not talk. They don't want to talk. They don't want to talk. And it's the whole back and forth with parents. But the truth is, if a child trusts the parent, right, they will talk, right? So parents, we usually, because children will naturally talk. That's the thing. In fact, it is unnatural for children to be facing a situation that is unusual to them, and they will not speak up. It's unnatural, right? The natural order is that, and the same thing that happens with us even as adults, right? It is unnatural when you feel that when you feel something, you want to talk. So what parents should focus on doing is to build trust systems with their children, right? Build trust systems around potential issues that could happen online. What do we mean by that? Build a trust system around the issue of child or sexual abuse. If you have heartfelt, if your child knows that if an issue happens online, if somebody asks them, tries to have a sexual conversation with them online, if any issue, anything relating to sexual issues online, if those kind of things happen, the child knows that I can talk to my parent without judgment, right? Without judgment, then the child will talk. So I think that's what parents need to focus on. They need to focus on building systems of trust with their children. Schools need to focus on building systems of trust with their children around this particular issue. Let the child know what is likely to happen. So, for example, if a child is in a household where the parent has talked about the fact that these are the issues that happen online, it's very possible that online you could have a guy, especially for younger girls, you could have a guy, if somebody comes to you on social media to tell you that, oh, they're a guy, they're a young guy, they're a student in this particular school, and they want to chat you up and become your friend online. When those people have those conversations, listen to them, don't be so quick, tell me about it, let's talk about it. And the child knows that. Because what happens with online groomers, for example, because this issue of sexual abuse usually happens a lot with grooming, where an older person takes on the personality of a younger person online and then begins to gain the trust of the child and then wants to abuse the child that way. When the child begins to see someone who looks like a normal friend trying to chat them up online, they will remember that you've had that conversation with them, and they know that they can approach you and have a conversation with you, and you will not judge them. However, if it's a situation where you never had such conversation with the child, right? Or you just throw rules and talk a lot about values without giving the child practical scenarios of what would happen. When the child faces those scenarios, the child is not sure whether the scenario is abnormal or it's normal, so doesn't know whether to talk, right? So those are things that parents should work around, building trust systems. And one way to build trust systems is no judgment. Another way is to give children practical scenarios as to the challenges that they will face and encourage them to have conversations with you about when they face those scenarios.
Yes, so I remember that our previous speaker on the second episode mentioned creating safe spaces in the house. But it started from the first speaker. She mentioned creating safe spaces for children to talk to you at home. And then the second speaker also mentioned that schools should create, trust, to build trust in the children, because they spend a lot of time with the kids in school. So if you build trust, if the children trust you enough and you've created a safe space, you made yourself safe for them, like they feel about their friends, just like you said, they would come to you when things are happening. And what I realized that we talk about parents a lot, but some children spend a lot of time with their caregivers, with their caregivers at home, or carers, however they call them. So, and some of these carers are not trained and they trust the caregivers. And so because they trust them, when things happen and they are afraid to tell their parents, they tell their caregivers that they trust. And the caregivers who are not trained will not know how to handle the situation and could probably even give them the wrong advice. So there's so much to be done around that cycle, also around training caregivers at home also on these issues. Because sometimes the caregiver gives their children, the child that they're caring for, their phones. And what if there's a porn on the phone, for instance, and the child just stumbles on it, and because, so I'm just trying to say, so what can parents also do? Talking to caregivers when hiring the right people and training these people in their homes, drivers, anybody, so sometimes driver is taking the child to school and the carer, and the child is trying to be, in quote, naughty, and they say, just take this phone so that we can drive to school, in peace. And then the child stumbles on maybe naked pictures on the phone, and and the child already exposed to these things. So what should parents do around hiring and training carers and domestic staff in their homes?
Your question partly answers itself by saying that parents need to train caregivers, because you would find that the percentage of parents or guardians who train caregivers, it's quite minimal, because don't also forget that the more trained the caregiver is, the more expensive the wage you will have to pay the caregiver. So that's a factor. But another thing that parents can do aside training is setting boundaries. Setting boundaries, and not setting arbitrary boundaries, right? Because the idea is not, so I feel also that we feel sometimes that around the issue of child online safety, there's a culture of fear that pervades the whole environment, right? So because the truth is, a lot of children are being abused sexually. A lot of children, not just sexually, psychologically, emotionally, children are being bullied. Children face a lot of challenges, right? So there's parents are scared. You don't want your child to be the next victim, right? So if care is not taken, that genuine fear, right, could turn into something else. And because you also want to balance it out, you also want the child to try, right? You're not going to to protect your child. You're not now going to lock your child in the house and not allow the child to go out. The child has to experience the real world, right? To be able to grow tough skin, to be able to grow, to be able to actually grow, right? So what parents can typically do around that is also set boundaries. Set boundaries with caregivers. Or you under no circumstance would you give my child a phone.
Mhm.
Under no circumstance. Or if my child tells you anything, right, you have a responsibility to tell me. When you set those boundaries, right, and you notice any infraction and you confront, everyone knows that you are serious. You for the major infraction, right? Oh, this child, I have a no touch policy concerning this child. You are the driver, you take this child to school, but under no circumstance should or anything, not under no child, right? If you want to touch the child, if you want to hold the child's hand, ask the child first. So those things we do, right? You have to set those boundaries. When you set those boundaries, and you monitor the boundaries before the major infractions happen, you'll be able to notice from the smaller infractions, because many times, of course, not every time, many times the major infractions would arise from smaller infractions that the caregiver noticed was overlooked by the parent or the guardian. So when you set boundaries, it's easier to be able to track and deal with any potential issues.
Thank you. One last question before I let you go straight to the point. It's just, at what age should we start talking to our children about internet safety? At what age should we start talking to them about it?
Can hear anything. The child, you should start talking. Now, the reason is simple, right? Because internet safety is not only about it starts with younger children. It starts with rules, right? It starts with rules. Do not touch this phone except I give you, right? This is the video you are watching. Do not touch the screen, because a major issue with children is that a lot of the things they watch. You give a child a video to watch on YouTube, and before you know it, there's an ad that is playing, and the child is wondering why the ad, and the child touches the screen, and before you know it, the child is watching content that they should not be watching. So those simple, small rules: not touch the screen. When I drop the phone here, when I drop the tablet here, don't touch the screen. Don't touch the screen. Don't touch the phone until I ask you, until I give you permission to touch it, right? You can only watch this content. I'll be honest with you. I've seen parents do that and they've hacked it, right? So as soon as the child can hear, right, of course, younger children will not understand. You might not be able to explain to them why. So just give them the rules. As they begin to grow older, as they begin to turn 3, as they begin to turn 4, you need to let the child know that. You know the way, and that's the thing that movies do. Movies let children know that there are villains out there. There are bad guys out there. So you need to start letting the child know that, there are a lot of good guys, but there are some bad guys out there, right? So be careful. So just that idea of getting the child to be careful. When the child knows that they have to be careful, because they watch films, they watch cartoons, and they see the bad guys, right? So if they understand that there are bad guys also in the real world and have to be careful, they'll ask you questions many times. So when they're not sure about something, they'll ask. When you're not sure, so if you keep emphasizing to a child, be careful, what the child does naturally is that when they're in a straight situation, they'll ask questions. They will ask the question, should I do this? Is this good? Is this bad? And all that. So that way you build the child. But for older children, for teenagers who have already grown and who already have a mind of their own, your rules are your rules, right? You are still the parent. Yes. Thank God for the Gen Z generation and how children of today are evolving and have evolved. But your rules are your rules. I bought the phone. I buy the phone for you. Even if an uncle or an auntie gives you a phone, you can't use the phone without my permission. So I permit you to use the phone. I pay for the internet. So when you misbehave, I ground you. I take the phone away from you. I take the internet away from you. So the rules are very, very core. But also at the base of the rules, like we said, also you want to build trust systems. Understand that children will make mistakes. Understand that children will face challenges online. When they face those challenges and they approach you, you must have a no judgment environment where children know that if I come and I tell my dad or my mom that I sent a nude picture. So that's one of the most scandalous things parents don't want to hear. I sent a nude picture to someone online. The child should be able to come and confess to you, knowing that you will feel pain, but you will not judge them, and you will embrace them and you will work with them to see how to solve the problem. Because we're having situations where children send new images, and people use those images to blackmail them, and they can't even report to their parents because they know that when they report to their parents, they're in trouble. And so we've seen situations where even in Nigeria, we had children who commit suicide because of such issues, right? So no judgment, totally no judgment, because no matter what the child does, right, your judgment will always be worse than whatever is outside, because the child sees you daily. The child will see the expression, the lack of the pain on your face, the feeling of failure that the child has felt. The child will see it on your face. The child will not see it on the face of the person out there. So the child would rather not come and sit in the house. They rather face the challenge outside and come in. So when they know that no matter what happens, they have a safe space around, they would trust you more. Yeah. Building trust systems, setting rules, but as you set rules, build trust systems alongside.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't want to keep you longer than I said I would. Usually, I don't know. The conversations just, I think I should stop saying 30 minutes, just leave it at 1 hour. Thank you so much. So I've learned so much. For one, when I want to download apps on my daughter's tab, I'm always careful when I see in-app purchases. I ensure that there's no card on her account because she has her own account, so that there's no card there. So even if she keep clicking and trying to buy or whatever, it doesn't go. And then if I see that it's heavily added with ads, I call them heavily added. So if I place a list, I said the ads are popping up too much, I just delete them. And if there are apps that I can actually afford to pay, this one is just $2 a month. I'm like, oh, that's cool. We can do that. We can do trial version first for 7 days, see how it works. And then it's $2 per month. That's money that you probably buy, what's it called, shawarma. So let's just, be safe and block the ads so that at least for the whole month, there's no ad popping up on the tab. So these are some of the measures that I have tried to put in place, which can be a little expensive if the child wants a lot of ads. But I think that parents can find a way around it. And that way that I have tried to do is, so I tried the trial version. After 7 days, I cancel. So that now say, can you don't try another app? So that she's always trying them without the ads. By the time she has tried 4 or 5 apps in a month, I haven't paid that month. So sometimes I just find a way around it to ensure that I'm not paying so much, because then there are so many apps on the tab that she's not even using them at all. So I think parents can find a way to keep their children safe. That's just like you've advised us today, and I'm really happy that we had this conversation. So if you have anything else you want to add to the parents in word of wisdom, knowledge, just to add to what you said, please just say it as your parting shots to us today.
Said everything, but we like to emphasize, build trust systems with your children. Beyond the devices, beyond anything, be closer to you. Try. It's hard, right? Especially with teenagers, but try as much as possible to befriend your child, right? And if you are almost as close or even closer to your child than a mobile device, right? Then you've won the battle. I'll be honest with you. If you can attempt to be as close or closer to your child than their mobile device, you've won the battle, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you. So parents, you've heard, try as much as possible to be closer as much closer to your children as their devices. I know that for sure, because sometimes my little girl wants to go use the bathroom and she wants to go with her tab, and then we start to fight. Yeah, I will say, drop it and go. She's like, no, mommy, I want to go with it. I'm like, no. And so sometimes it's very difficult to get them detached from their tabs. So we're all learning as parents, and I hope that we'll do better. And for those who are even intending parents, I hope that we'll do better. Thank you so much, Mr. Chukwuemeka, for coming on the show today. So everyone, we've come to the thank you. We've come to the end of today's episode of Safeguarding Our Children. I want to say thank you to the Mastercard Foundation for this opportunity to record these sessions for parents as an extension of our Child Development Conference, the 2022 Child Development Conference. And we still have more to come. We have water safety, we have road safety, and we have fire safety. And so I hope that you will tune in. If you haven't watched any of the episodes, please go back, just a few steps back, and just watch home safety, watch school safety, and then watch the conference also, get involved, learn a few things. Go on our website, www.besafetysavvy.com, and download templates and download the safety policies template that we have there. Have fun, and I hope that you learn as much as I did today. Until the next episode, my name is Raquel.